that are so important.
So Marcella, question for you. How can students trust that you have the familiarity necessary to head the SRC when you hadn't attended a meeting prior to announcing your candidacy bid?
That's an excellent question that I had asked myself several times. It's something that came up on YIPYA. We have a YIPYA portion on our website if you all want to check it out. So sure, that is an important thing. My fear of running towards an SRC position, for any SRC position since the beginning of last year when I started hearing about the SRC, is the same fear that I had that stopped me from going to SRC meetings. I have been hearing from people, both that are in the SRC, that go to SRC meetings, that they're extremely long, frustrating, that people get really rude at one another, and that very few things, very important discussions are actually done. So I was content during most of this year to just reading the minutes, talking to people that have been to the meetings, talking to the ministers, and getting what I thought was definitely not enough, but the right amount of information and SRC updates that I needed without just frustrating myself and getting upset and wasting some precious 3 hours of my weekly time that I could be doing homework. I do believe that I have enough leadership experience gained both at Quest and at places where I've been before to head an SRC that would work actively to diminish those long, demanding, hurtful hours sitting in a meeting that scares everyone away and that decreases student accessibility and student interest in the SRC dramatically.
Thank you, Marcella. Can I have a question from Jana Lee? So my question is kind of an expansion of that. Since many of you have not been to very many SRC meetings, I'm wondering why you think you're actually qualified for the positions you're running for and whether you're actually ready for the time commitment that the SRC takes.
So I'll start off. One of the nice things about having Daniel as a roommate is I get to hear about all the SRC stuff, usually right after the meeting. So even though before this time I hadn't been to many SRC meetings, I could still figure out what I thought was wrong. And we talked a little bit about what could be done to ratify that. So I've known about the problems of the SRC for a while. I've had leadership positions outside of Quest. I've been an integral part of the Rugby program, essentially trying to expand that a little bit. And ultimately, I think my job as a personal assistant doing the essentially finances and then also administrative tasks will really help in kind of helping move along the process and recreating finances in Quest, hopefully.
I know Jana Lee and many others probably know this, but I've actually attended every single SRC meeting except for 3 since I came to Quest 3 years ago. And so just wanted to clarify.
You got it.
To answer your question, to be honest, I feel very unqualified to be running for an SRC executive position. I did anyways because this is so important to me and because I was asked to by several SRC current ministers. I think that SRC plays a really important role and I want to be a part of that continuing. I definitely think it's a huge problem that even if Quest students wanted to elect an executive group who has all had experience with the SRC, they couldn't do that. I think that speaks to ministerial burnout, which is something that I think really should be talked about, and a lack of student engagement, which is like 2 sides of the same coin, and I think the same problem solving can be used to address both of those issues. I think you reserve.
So by extent of not having been to many SRC meetings, I'm also a first year, and I figured I'd just put that out there because I figured it would probably come up at some point.
You go down.
So this is the reason that I am running together with Marcella and Lauren, because I feel like their investment in this community for several years already will really help in them giving me the leadership that I need to perform my potential role on the SRC. As far as things like time commitment or actual qualifications for the position of Minister of Finance go, well then suddenly being a first year becomes kind of an advantage because I am not stuck up in my keystone or I don't have only concentration classes to take. But more than that, like I mentioned before, I learned to juggle a lot of things by working in a completely new student body, or student government body, sorry, that we built from the ground up. In terms of just specifically the position of Minister of Finance, I've also managed funds for a music festival and an interdisciplinary art show. And I think those are, experiences that shaped me for that role specifically.
The next question, Lauren, your platform suggests turning positions like the Residence Council, Community Educators, EMS, SRC, and Lumen Room into work-study positions. How would you facilitate that with the school and their budget?
So we've been talking to the school this week, and we found that doing most of that is quite doable. One of the really tricky ones is SRC positions, so we would need to rethink how we could work on that. That's important to us because we think that no student should have to choose between having a campus leadership position and working to be able to support themselves. It's an accessibility issue, and it's really, really important that anyone can pursue campus leadership. So we still need to work on that for the SRC, but for the other campus roles, the school is quite willing to help us out with that.
Thank you for running. My question is, so there's been a lot of issues brought up, and a really wide range of them. My question is, are there any issues that are brought up or that you have in mind that are actually beyond the purview of the SRC, or that you don't think the SRC should be addressing?
It's a really loaded question.
I think my answer is to varying degrees. I mentioned before that I'd like to see the SRC as a facilitating body of sort of a political community. We also wrote on our platform that we think that our community is often divided on important issues. And so I think that all the problems that have come up so far are, in those problems, the SRC necessarily plays an integral role. But that doesn't mean that the sole responsibility for working on those issues lies with the SRC. And that's why we've been advocating for more extensive collaboration. Right? There are so many great bodies on campus and so many dedicated students that why would the SRC not work together with, for example, the residential council to look at mental health and things like that. So, yeah.
So I strongly think that any body, committee, organization, any aspect of Quest that involves students or affects students should demand a student voice as part of that organization. And because of this, I actually, as part of my platform, I want to mandate that every single council or committee that Quest operates that in any way affects students has at least one student representative on it and has to function with that student there. We had a lot of issues with the Arts Council this year, as Andrew Wood, the Minister of Arts and Culture, can attest to. And it's quite interesting how they've used their power to essentially push them aside and do what they want regardless of student input and student voices. And I'd love to see more support, not only of the Arts Council and Fine Arts within that, but as well as supporting student voices on anything that is going to actually affect students.
I will respectfully disagree. I do think that the SRC is a body, as it stands right now, is a body of 12 people maximum that should not claim to be able to speak for an entire student body, and that there are certain issues that are going to come up throughout the years that the people, the limited group of people who are in that council are just not qualified to speak for those people. So I do think that we have a role in facilitating those spaces and supporting those groups whenever they do need space from the SRC, but there are certain issues that come up where any sort of formality that the SRC inherently requires might be rather harmful for the groups that might need a space to speak on campus.
Am I able to respond to that?
No, there will be a portion of the debate at the end where you're able to ask each other questions. You're not named in the comment, but you may ask at the end, after we have another question from Steve.
Hi everyone. So my question is on participation. Many of you already mentioned the problem that sometimes it can be pretty hard to engage students in things like this. So my question is, how do you encourage people to be part, especially Quest students, to be part of the political process and on a bigger scale to be part of the Quest community?
So a big part of my plan is student engagement within the financial process. The way I've currently thought of doing that is having an honorary guest come and sit in on these financial subcommittee meetings, but actually have voting power. And that's because I want more student engagement within the body, and that still needs to be worked out, and it needs to be communicated with SOC ministers to figure out if one, there's a better way to do that, or two, if they think that it would not be viable, and so I want to rework that. But I think it isn't, it's critical that these students feel that the SRC represents them, the SRC is here to do something for them. And so that's the thing that I think really needs to be addressed with next year. And so I also look forward to talking with the other candidates to see how they specifically plan on doing that.
Are you answering this question?
Yeah? Okay. So this is a good time to talk about what could restructuring the SOC look like. And obviously, as we've mentioned before, this is going to need a lot of student input, and it might be completely different. But like I mentioned in my opening statement, Quest is a very busy environment, and I don't want to solely put sort of the responsibility for being a politically engaged individual on every individual student, because it's hard to balance all the things that we want to do here. And so restructuring the SRC could look like assigning a specific portion or segment of the student population to a representative on the SRC so that there's a direct personal connection. So instead of having 12 ministers represent the entire student body, you would have, say, 18 ministers represent each a different section. And so the way I worked with this before is that this creates a personal connection. It's often sort of split up by residents, so you can imagine like different floors. But again, the details of this would need to be worked out with a lot of collaboration. But yeah, so direct representation to address this.
I think the most effective way would be involving students more, and that is actively creating systems and organizations and structures that encourage and sort of mandate that students are more involved. I try to attempt to do this with my platform through the restructure and redesigning of all ministerial positions, as well as the creation of the academic council, which actually comprises, not only is it led by a current minister, but it comprises, I've put 6, but it's open to interpretation by how we actually want to form the committee, but 6 students that are elected onto that. The monetary council that I want to create would also see more students elected onto that. And I think by actively creating these spaces in these areas where more students can be involved, you sort of bring it to them by allowing more people to have more voices in the processes that we're creating.
I think one important part of supporting ministers would be to support them in creating their subcommittees and having strong subcommittees. So one idea that Marcella, Dawn, and I have talked about with some of the candidates who are running for ministerial positions is having them not running their subcommittees. So there are some positions where there are 2 people running and they've talked to each other, and the person who isn't elected was going to continue working with them on their subcommittee. So having more people involved who can reach out to students and make connections that way.
Thank you, candidates. So Colin, you propose a requirement of submitting proposals of over $1,500 2 months in advance of funding. This would mean the earliest events or initiatives like Northwest Winter Fest, the Wealthy Room Furniture this year, and the MARC could receive funding is in November. Can you speak to the thinking behind this proposed policy?
Midway through the interview yesterday, I realized that 2 months is not a wieldy number. It's one of those clunky things. I actually, during the interview, I lowered it down to about a month. And it's those, essentially the idea behind it is, I don't want another issue like Dancing Bear or the speaker series. I can't say colloquially, I've tried many times. But essentially you have situations where I think they both should have received funding, but it led to a large-scale debate within the SRC over whether they're funded because essentially their hand is being forced. And so that's one of the ways I want to try to reduce tension within the SRC, is having time so there can actually be debate and talk over issues rather than we need the money, the money next week. Please give us $10,000. And so it's that issue that I'm trying to address more than anything else.
Thank you.
So being on the SRC this year, I've noticed that one of the problems is that the SRC seems to lack a clear mandate or clear vision that all the ministers are like well versed in and understand and have like come up with together in a collaborative manner. So far tonight I've heard words like represent, like advocate. These words are great, but I'm wondering if you could each sort of succinctly state what you see the purpose or mission of the SRC as being and what that means to you in terms of concrete goals or concrete structural ideas for the SRC next year. Thanks.
So, as a minister right now, I really don't. At the beginning of the year, we tried to do this, but it sort of hasn't worked. And I think the biggest issue is not so much coming up with that mission or that goal, but it's telling everyone about it so you can't stop doing it or stop attempting to do it. And I also think that involves really ensuring that throughout the entire year, you're collaborating as much as you possibly can as a team. I know I've definitely played a role this year, and I think that goes back to slowly understanding and learning better the position of privilege that I carry, where I've done things or said things or directed conversation in ways that sort of steer away from that general mission or mandate that we set at the beginning of the year. And I think that's something that I'm realizing that I've done after the fact, and because of that, I'm starting to realize the importance of actually really ensuring that once you pick that mission or mandate that you're trying to move forward with, that you never forget about it. It's something that you're constantly repeating in your head, and before you do anything, you're always referring back to it and ensuring to see if it's actually what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish with the actions that you're taking.
So that's an excellent question. Those words are very vague and abstract.